Are there any courses?
Intellectual curiosity. Accounting was a stepping stone.
A lifesaver for a lot of people.
Like, find a good manager that's going to sit down with you and teach you.
How do you know people are hardworking?
I studied what I was doing.
What do you look for?
It's more about who you are and how you think.
Hey, hi, Brett. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
So nice to see you. I've been following you for a while, and it's so nice to finally meet you in person.
Yeah, and thanks for having me. I love talking about this kind of stuff. Obviously, I post about it on LinkedIn. I see you on LinkedIn, so it's good to have like a real face-to-face conversation about this stuff.
Awesome. So before we start, I will give a quick introduction. So Brett Hampson is a finance director at Allstate Insurance. He has over a decade of FP&A experience, and I have been following him for a while. And he does a lot of good stuff on his LinkedIn. Also, he has a course which is forecasting performance, which we'll talk about later today. So, Brett, today we have a specific agenda, which is talking about how people can migrate or how people can transition from traditional accounting and audit roles into commercial FP&A finance business partner role. So that is what we will be talking about. So if you could help us with your experience, how has been your journey in terms of your present role, and how has it been over the last 10 years?
Yeah, of course. So I'll go way back to when I was in school. I was in school studying finance. I went to Baylor University, and one of the first conversations I had with a school counselor, I said I want to major in finance. And they said, "That's great, but it's really hard to get a job in finance right out of school with just a finance degree." They said, "Consider majoring in accounting or doing a lot of accounting courses along with it." So I thought, that's fine. I'm good enough at accounting, but for me, it was a means to an end. So I really like invested in my accounting experience. I took as many accounting courses as I could take without becoming a CPA. And so then when I actually graduated from school, I was really struggling with getting a finance job. Any sort of FP&A, finance business partner, any of those names. If it had finance in the name, I struggled to get the job. I really struggled to get interviews too. It was really, I think it was very competitive. They were looking for people with experience. So what happened was I actually got a role with Allstate Insurance as an accountant. I was doing operational accounting. So I was posting journal entries to the income statement. I was the expense guy doing
Mhm.
expenses within accounting. And I'll tell you, like, it was a great experience. I got to learn the income statement. I got to learn like how the money gets put on the income statement. I really got to learn what an income statement was. Like, I had no idea. Even coming out of my finance degree, like I generally understood, but it was a big complex company. So coming out of that, I did accounting for a year. I
Mhm.
knew that it wasn't quite what I wanted to do, but I could do it and I could do it well because I had a ton of schooling and I sort of got it.
Mhm.
However, I was lucky enough to get my foot in the door at Allstate that I was able to transition into a finance role from that accounting role. So I think people knew that I wanted to be in finance. I had made that known. They saw it on my resume. So they knew that's where I wanted to be. So really, accounting was a stepping stone, sort of paid my dues in accounting, got over to finance. And then from finance, I haven't left. So I did a couple little stints to like
Mhm.
help work on like product type things, but really stayed within the finance realm for the last 9, 10 years of my career.
Mhm.
And I've loved it. And now that's not for everybody, but I absolutely loved my experience. I knew within my first couple of months of being in finance that I loved it. And now looking back, I'm like, that was a really smart move to start in accounting and then transition over into finance.
It's very interesting. So you always knew you wanted to be in finance, but nobody would hire somebody without accounting skills into finance, which is the reality, right? People need they need some background. You need some background in those accounting roles. So coming back to your transition when you did this 8 9 years ago, what were the few skills you thought you could use from your prior experience in accounting, and what are some skills that you had to build from start, so some new skills that you had to develop over the last years?
I mean, even just knowing how the income statement gets built and how journal entries get posted. Like, You're always posting to the income statement and the balance sheet. Like, even just knowing that basic stuff put me
Mhm.
actually way ahead of all the other finance people, because
Yeah.
the heart of being in finance and FP&A is like, something happened on the income statement. Somebody prints the income statement for you if you're an FP&A. The accounting team puts it together. They essentially hand it to you and they say, here you go. In finance, we're supposed to look at it and say, ooh, something looks off or some result looks different. And then you need to
Mhm.
know where to go next. And so a lot of finance people struggle with that last part of like, I don't know where to, like, I don't know
Yeah.
why this is wrong. I don't know what could be the issue here, or maybe, but having coming from accounting, I was like, oh, this is potentially an issue where they over accrued last month.
Yeah.
They're releasing the accrual against an actual invoice. And if what I'm saying is totally foreign, that's okay. Like, this is years of me doing this, but like, I knew that kind of stuff because
Mhm.
I had worked in accounting and I had seen it happen. I was the one
Yeah.
posting the journal entries and the
Yeah.
accruals and the offsets. So I think that was one thing that was like really impactful. And truthfully, like, I leaned on that. I would encourage anybody that's coming from like an audit accounting role, like, lean on your experience, because it's going to differentiate you. You're going to be able to, like, it'll be like you have a superpower that nobody else has. You might
Mhm.
feel really deficient in 10 ways, like, oh, I don't know
Mhm.
how to use Excel as good. I don't know financial modeling as well. I don't know all of these things. But if you have one thing that you're really good at, lean hard on it, because the leadership is looking at the whole team and saying, hey, I've got 10 people who work for me. I've got one guy who's really good at financial modeling over here. That's not you. That's fine. But I've got this one guy that really understands accounting, that when I need to understand what's going on, I can lean on them. So you
Mhm.
become like your own little super hero of some sort.
Yeah.
So I'd say like that's probably like tip number one, is like really lean into like what you're really good at. Um, and you'll pick up the rest over time. Like, you might find a new superpower a couple years on. Like, you might really learn to love financial modeling. You learn that, but like, you'll learn it on the roll and you'll learn it from other people. But I'd say that's maybe my biggest takeaway that I look back on, is like, I just really leaned on what I was really good at.
Mhm.
Uh, and it transitioned really well, and people saw a lot of value in my ability to do that.
Your accounting skills were actually your biggest strength when you moved into FP&A, is what you're saying. So a lot of people forget about that and they're focused on Excel, Power BI, financial modeling, but it's important to keep in mind that your accounting or audit skills will somewhere or the other help you and differentiate you in your next role as well. So thank you so much for that. Now that we talked about the skills, uh, is there any is there any certification? Are there any courses that you had to undertake when you were new to FP&A, or would you recommend any certification courses that people should look at while they are doing this transition?
I'll give my experience and I'll give my advice, but it's only sort of my
Mhm.
perspective. Everybody's different. I did not get any I didn't pay for any courses. I didn't pay for any certifications. That
Mhm.
helped me. There was nothing that I did that I feel like was really helpful that I paid for. I had just graduated. I had a bunch of student debt. I didn't have money to spend. So I was not looking to invest in anything. What I did find though was this YouTube channel with free Excel training called Excel is Fun. All one word. Excel is Fun on YouTube. I
Yes.
would study that for an hour to 2 hours a day, and I would do the practice problems. And because I knew that in finance, you had to be really good at Excel.
Mhm.
So I used that channel. It's got everything in it. It's Power Query,
Yes.
Power BI,
Yes.
Excel tip, pivot tables, everything. You're probably going to learn more than you need if you go there. You're not even going to like use half of it, but
Mhm.
it helped me to be at least proficient enough to where I wasn't slowing the whole team down when I got into my FP&A role. And then when I was in my FP&A role and I was like, oh, this guy next to me is really good at
Mhm.
pivot tables, and I don't even know what a pivot table is. I would go on to Excel as fun at night, and I would go learn the pivot table
Yeah.
things. Now, if you don't like his teaching style, there's other courses out there. There's a bunch of stuff, but like, that's a great free place to start.
Yes.
And then I'd say on top of that, what I really did was, once I was in the FP&A role, was like, I studied what I was doing. So if I was asked to put together a report, I would sit there and I would stare at it. I'd be like, what is this report saying? I wouldn't just kind of do my work and like move on with my life. It's really easy to do that, especially in a big company like I started in. Uh, but what I do is I would slow down and say, what is this report? What is it telling me? What are some really interesting things that I've seen? Why is this month different than last month's report? Like, why did the senior leadership ask me to do this? So I'd really study my work. And then last thing I did was I took it up a level and I would listen to earnings calls. I would listen to like when the senior leaders would talk, I would take a ton of notes. I would listen to the earnings calls if you're a publicly traded company or you're working at one. Like that's the kind of stuff that I would try to soak up as much as I could. It didn't pay off in the beginning, but really over time, a couple years in, it was like I understood the business. I understood how my work connected to the business. And that just made it even more impactful when I would do something or like try to dig into something.
Yeah, I can relate to most of the things that you said, especially the Excel YouTube Excel 101. So Excel is fun is the name, right?
Yep.
I remember when I was working in audit and in audit also you need to be proficient in Excel. So I started learning Excel with that. At that time there were very few online courses. There were no online courses, in fact.
Right. Same.
Even if you had the money, you could not. I think that was what do you call that was that was a lifesaver for a lot of people back then, when there was no online courses and only YouTube was there, and which was also just starting out.
Right.
So I love that. I still remember there used to be Excel tips, like Excel tip number one, Excel tip
Yep.
number two. I
Yep.
still remember them. And then you mentioned about when you're doing your job, which is reporting, you just don't do the reports, but you also figure out why those reports are done and who reads them and what's the context. So that is something very, very insightful. And what was the last thing you mentioned? You mentioned one more thing, which I think I missed.
Yeah, listening to earnings calls, listening to
Yes,
senior leadership
yes,
talking, like
yes.
they've been
Hmm.
doing it for 30 years, 20 years. Like they know they have a way of distilling it down into a way that like is
Yes,
really helpful and powerful and gets
yes,
you the key messages. So like just listening to senior leaders talk about the business was really helpful because then I understand the industry, the business, the
yes,
results, all that kind of stuff.
yes. So listening to earnings call is super helpful. Is absolutely. Now, if we move to the next section where, say, the person has joined FP&A, say somebody in your team has joined in your department, in your finance team, and how would you guide that person for the first 30, 60, 90 days? So those are the most difficult part of any transition. What would be your advice? How should they approach that?
The first thing that I would tell the person, and I try to tell people this, is I expect very little of you when you're brand new, especially if you don't have a background in the work we're doing. Like it's my job as the leader to give you the work and tell you how to do it. So if you're not doing the job right, it's not your fault.
Mhm.
So I think a lot of people come in really nervous and anxious and they're afraid to fail. So maybe they're taking notes on every word they hear and they're not even listening to what their managers say. I've seen that happen.
Yeah.
And I'm like, just relax and like, listen, like I'll repeat myself. It's not a big deal. But I think some people get so anxious, so nervous because they want to do so well. And if you're working for somebody that makes you feel like that, it's probably worth considering working somewhere else. But like find a good manager that's going to sit down with you and teach you and just kind of relax and try to listen because you're going to learn better if you're relaxed. You're taking the right notes instead of every single word you're trying to write down. That's maybe the first thing. But then on the heels of that, I would say work extra hard, right? Like you get one first impression with your manager, you get one time to impress people. Like just go a
Mhm.
little extra hard. Like, and I'll give you my experience. I only say this because I did it. I tried to work 1 hour more than everybody else in the office for 5 years. So for the first 5 years of my career, when the last person would leave, I would put in an extra hour. It could have been Excel practice. It could have been rebuilding a report. It could have been just kind of tinkering around with something, but I tried to make it a productive hour where I was just working harder than everybody else, not to show people that I work hard, not to try
Mhm.
to like create an image, but because I actually wanted to create more output than average people. That way, my
Mhm.
manager would look at me and say, wow, like they may not know all the skills. They may not be the best at FP&A. They may not still understand the financial modeling piece, but they're putting in the effort. They're really trying to work hard and learn this stuff. So I feel like that's maybe the things that I would say is somebody's coming into a role. Like you don't have to know everything. You don't have to be an expert. Don't pretend to be an expert. That's going to actually hurt you. Just
Mhm.
relax, sit back, ask questions, and like just put in a little bit extra work. That way you have that great first impression and then carry that for as long as you can because you're going to start to outwork everybody. You're going to start to climb up the ladder, get the promotions, get better ratings. Like it's going to work well for you if you just put in that little extra bit of energy.
Key takeaway, what I hear from you is not to be too anxious. Uh, be yourself and learn as much as you can and put in that extra effort, especially in the early years or in the early days.
And your manager is going to give you the work. So the first 30, 60, 90 days, you shouldn't be bringing work to that. Like you shouldn't be coming up with ideas. Literally just listen to what they say,
Yep.
do what they say, do it a little bit faster than they want it, and do it a little
Yep.
bit better than they want it. And you're good. Like don't try to bring these new ideas and these crazy thoughts. Like they just want you to do the job so they can relax a little bit. So that's, yeah, I'd say don't overthink it. Just relax, do the job, work a little bit harder, and you should be more than fine.
Now, if I have to ask you, now we talked about the skills, right? We talked about the skills like accounting skills, which can help you. Then they need to learn Excel, financial modeling, all that on the job can be done. So when you are interviewing people in your team, or if you get a chance to interview FP&A freshers, what do you look for? Are there any experience you can share of interviews, and what questions would you ask them if you were going to take the interview?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think like number one thing I'm looking for, especially for entry level. So I'm gonna picture like you don't have any finance experience, FP&A experience. You're coming, you applied to a job that we're not asking for experience. I'm not gonna ask you about financial modeling. I'm not gonna ask you about budgeting. I'm not gonna ask you about much in the way of like actual finance stuff.
Mhm.
So what I'm really looking for though is like it's more about who you are and how you think. So the first thing is going to be intellectual curiosity. So are you
Mhm.
curious about the way the world works? Are you curious about things? I'm usually going to get that through the questions that you ask me. So at the end of the interview, I'm going to say, what questions do you have for me? And if you ask
Mhm.
me about like the stock price and what it's doing, like I kind of don't like that's not a great question. Probably don't ask me about the stock price because I work in finance and like a small part of the organization. I don't really like I don't think about that often. What I'm thinking about is like how do I partner with senior leaders or how do I build an efficient team with like how do I recruit great talent? So like ask me questions that are very specific to my role. And you're going to be able to demonstrate your intellectual curiosity because you're asking me questions about things that I actually care about.
Mhm.
And you're trying to figure out like, am I a good leader? Like if you ask me questions about how I am as a leader, like I know you're already thinking about like, do I want to work for this
Mhm.
person? It makes you very curious about the role. Ask about like, hey, how does this work? What kind of reporting what kind of tools do you use? Things like that. I'd say number two thing I'm looking for is being a decent communicator. Like I really want people that I can at some point put in front of a business partner and say like, hey, I need you to go talk to the business partner about their results. I
Mhm.
need you to be able to communicate verbally, effectively. You don't have
Mhm.
to be, like speech ready. You don't have to be
Mhm.
trained in this, but just be able to have like a really flowing, good conversation in a way that's like pretty normal. So I'd say just be like a decent communicator. That's what I'm looking for. And then the last thing I'm working for, and it goes back to the last question you asked me, is I want you to be a hard worker. So I really
Mhm.
value people who can work a little bit harder because FP&A comes and goes in cycles. I think same with audit and accounting is like you might have
Yep.
an easy week, but then you're going to have a hard week. And I need to be able to know that I can rely on you to like get the work done. It doesn't always mean working late. Sometimes it just means working hard and like get like hey, we're on the same team, we're working hard. So I'm really looking for those two things: intellectual curiosity, decent at communication,
Mhm.
and hardworking. So again, I'm not going to ask financy questions. I'm not going to try to stump you with like
Mhm.
some tricky modeling question, unless you're in more of a senior level role
Mhm.
or analyst level role or manager level role. I'm not going to bring it in
Mhm.
unless it's in those higher roles. But a question that I do often ask is this: tell me about a time when you had to solve a problem with minimal guidance. So it could be literally anything. I've had people talk to me about like, oh, I had to move across the country. I've never moved across the country before. I had to learn how to get boxes to pack my stuff. I had to get some friends to help me. Like, okay, that's a great example. So it could be literally any sort of example that you're going to answer it with. I want to watch how you think about like a difficult problem where somebody didn't give you all the steps to do it. Because that's what I do as a leader, as I'm going to give you hey, I want this report built, kind of want it to look like this, but you've got to figure out how to do it. And it's
Got
on
it.
a timeline. So that's one of my favorite questions. Is like, tell me about a time when you had to solve a problem with minimal guidance.
Got it. So intellectual curiosity and initiative is you look for, which you check by seeing if those people ask you the right questions during the interview. And communication is you can gauge with your interaction in that 30 minutes or 45 minutes.
Yep.
And how do you figure out about hard work? So how do you know people are hardworking? Is there a way you figure out, or is it through the question which you just mentioned, which was making sure that you understand how they think and how they problem solve?
Yeah, I'm more listening for it throughout the interview, so it's not going to be like a specific question. It's a funny you asked me that because in my interview when I first got the job, somebody asked me, they said, "Are you more hardworking or smart?"
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, "Oh, that's an interesting question. How do I answer this?" Because if I say hardworking, I'm saying I'm not
Yeah.
very smart. But if I say smart, they don't think I'm hardworking.
Yeah.
And as I was like reflecting in that moment, I was like, no, I'm just kind of a hard worker. Like I don't get things quickly,
Mm-hmm.
but I work really hard to make sure that I get them eventually. And then I end up being in a better spot long term. So I'm not gonna, I usually don't ask that question, but I am gonna listen for it when I say like, hey,
Mm-hmm.
tell me about yourself. If I hear like, oh, I signed up for this committee and I became the president of this thing, or I was on this team and I was an all-American at this sport, or like if I hear things that tell me like you know how to work hard, I sort of just check the box and move on. It
Got it.
doesn't have to be like you're the hardest worker in the world, but like I need to know that you've done some hard things and you've achieved some outcomes that are really cool.
So I think that brings me to the end of our conversation. Before we wrap up, a couple of things. Is there any last message that you want to convey? Any key takeaways that you can share? And also, we know that you have a newsletter which is super interesting. You have an ebook and you have a course. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that and how people can reach out to you, how people can access that.
I'll go back to where I started, which is
Mhm.
finance and FP&A are competitive. People want to be in them. You want to like everybody wants to be in them. So it's like it's not going to be a walk in the park. People aren't handing out jobs. I say like the best thing you can do is truthfully, this is my advice that I've given to multiple people when they ask me like I'm struggling to get interviews, I'm struggling to get my resume even read. Here's what I'd say. One, try to connect with like a local recruiter. So here in the US, we have a ton of local recruiters who will like, if you connect with them and you give them your resume and you get on a phone call with them, when a role comes up, they will put you in front of the hiring manager for that role. It increases your chances that you're going to get that job a lot. Now, work with 5 different local recruiters because like there's no reason you can't work. They all get different types of jobs that they can work
Yep.
on. So spread it around. Go get your resume in front of local recruiters. Don't stop there though. I would say if you find a company that you really want to work for, go get a job in accounting at that company. Accounting and finance are like brother and sister. They're right next to each other. So if you can learn accounting, you can at least network your way over into finance. And once you're inside of a company, it's so much easier to move around than from outside of a company trying to get in. So those are my
Yep.
2 pieces of advice I always give people if they're looking for jobs. Connect with local recruiters. They're going to increase your odds, but don't bank on that. Go get a job in accounting. You might be like, "Oh, I don't want to work in accounting. I don't really even know how to do it." That's okay. Like some accounting jobs are you can learn it on the job, especially if you have a finance degree, accounting degree, you come from audit, something like that. They
Mhm.
sit right next to each other. Usually they work with each other every single month when the books close. Like it's a really easy transition over there. So that's maybe the 2 pieces of advice I'd give. And yeah, and like there's a ton of us on LinkedIn who talk about finance, FP&A, all the different flavors of it. We all have sort of different experiences and different takes. So I say to the extent that it's valuable for any of you all, like follow me on LinkedIn. That's a great place. I post every single day on LinkedIn about finance, FP&A topics. I skew a little bit more towards the leadership stuff because I just love talking about leadership. But
Mhm.
honestly, even if you're early in your career, like it's great to learn how leaders think
Yes.
within your organization. That way you can kind of like say, hey, what are they looking for? What are they talking about? I want to talk about the same stuff that they talk about, especially in like an interview. So LinkedIn's a great place. I do a lot of free stuff there. Another free resource for you is my weekly newsletter called Forecasting Performance. You can go to forecastingperformance.com and just sign up. It's totally free. In the first like 7 days after you sign up, I send you like my favorite FP&A frameworks after that, one a day every day. So it's like a little mini course on like how to set a vision for your role, how to think about FP&A, like how we add value to an organization. It's really kind of like an introduction to FP&A. And then from there, I just share like tips, tricks, best practices on that newsletter. Also, like on a weekly basis, I have like different people who reach out to me who have different other courses. Like right now, I'm helping somebody sort of promote their Power BI course. Like I don't teach Power BI, but he's really good at it. So I'm helping to drive people there. It's a free course there. So like that's how you learn about all the cool stuff that like I'm connected with and working on. And then last thing that Asif mentioned, like I've got an ebook out. It's reasonably priced ebook. The cool thing about that ebook is like I try to take you through a lot of what I talk about in the newsletter, but I give you Excel templates and workbooks to like help actually practice the stuff and use it. It's great for people who are early in their career who are like trying to figure that out. The second thing that I've done recently is I launched my first video course on like how to actually think about financial modeling, like how to build FP&A around a financial model in a business. And so right now that course is closed for enrollment, but you can get on the wait list. So I opened it up sort of over the holidays, got some really good interest. A ton of people signed up for that. I got some good feedback though. Like there's things that I want to improve within the course. So I sort of shut it down for now. I'm going to rebuild it back up and relaunch it later. So the only way you're really going to hear about that is if you're on the wait list for that course. I'm not going to talk about it on LinkedIn or anything. So go to forecastingperformance.com. You're going to find a button somewhere that says get on the wait list. I'd say just get on the wait list, out of sight, out of mind. As soon as I launch it, you'll be the first to know.
Awesome. So we'll make sure we put all the relevant links here in the description wherever this video goes. And thank you so much for joining us today. I hope we chat again soon. And I'm sure this will help a lot of people down the line. So uh, thank you so much, Brett. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. This was awesome.